Well, so many of you have been asking for it, and today is your day. We are talking whiskey and bourbon and some of our favorites and kind of the history of it. So good to see you, Mike Ward.
Great to be here, and what a great subject to talk about.
And there's so much to talk about. I just emceed an event a couple weeks ago, and one of the live auction items was this ridiculous collection of whiskeys and bourbons. They had a Pappy that was 15 years. They had a Pappy that was 10 years. They had Blantons. Let's just start with when whiskey saw this crazy resurgence where it became so popular.
There's a great story that Trey Zoller from Jefferson Whiskey tells, and it goes back to the 1990s when he was pouring his whiskey at an event, and there was a guy right next door pouring Pappies at this event, and they could barely give away their whiskeys.
Pappy?
Even Pappy back then. It was somebody pouring Pappy Van Winkle, and they were both like, well, we'll get through this event, but nobody was really drinking either one of them.
Okay, so what turned?
Well, I mean, I think you look at the early 2000s, and then especially into the 2000 teens, and then COVID hit, and everybody was at home drinking whiskey. But we saw this interest in whiskey kind of rise, interest in bourbon whiskey. And then all of a sudden, when the market starts to remove all the whiskey because everybody's buying it, well, you can't make it right away. So then there was a shortage. So when there's a shortage and everybody wants it and can't have it, that's when you really get, those aged whiskeys or those special whiskeys or things like Blanton's and Pappy Van Winkle and others. There's a bunch of them we could list out that become really popular because people can't have them.
Well, I was going to say, when I started my whiskey bourbon journey, and it was kind of by accident, we went to visit friends in Nashville, and they took us to a bourbon bar. And I was, back in college, you do a shot of something. It wasn't like you're sipping it for the flavors. But we went to this bourbon bar, and I tried an Eagle Rare, and it was spectacular.
Okay.
Just a sipping, whiskey. And from that moment on, I'm like, wait a minute, I want to know a little bit more. And so fast forward, and we were at a fundraiser, and there was a bourbon tasting. And so we bid on it with friends. And someone came to the house and told us a little bit of the history, and we did a whole sampling and how some of these are made. And it just opened my mind to how each whiskey or bourbon tastes so different. I mean, it really is a little like wine when you get to that because there are no two bourbons alike.
Yeah, and it's one of my most fun classes to teach. Everybody knows, they've been listening for quite a while. Wine's my first, and I love teaching wine classes and talking about wine, where the flavors come from. You can do the same thing with whiskey. Yeah. And then you can, let's say you've never had it before, and then I put a bourbon in front of you, a rye whiskey from the U.S., and then I put a Scotch and an Irish whiskey and had four of them. I would be careful because the alcohol is a little higher, but if you've never had whiskey before, you can tell the difference. Now, whether you'd be able to say, that's the Irish, that's the Scotch, you may not be able to do that, but it's just telling the difference in all of those. And it's a remarkable difference.
And some of them might be a little too much for you. I remember when we went to the Bourbon Trail and, Basil Hayden and Baker's and Booker's.
Yeah.
And there is a difference in some of them, as they say, will put a little hair on your chest.
Well, yes. And it is the one thing I talk about in class versus with wine. You can talk about difference in alcohol, but it's slight. Oh, this Chardonnay is 13.5. This one might be 14. People can't really tell that. But when you're tasting whiskeys and you have an 80 proof, 40% alcohol, or a 120 proof, there's a big difference. You're going to taste it, and it's going to be much harder to drink and affect you a lot more with the high proof. Now, I don't want to turn people away from that, but we have to discuss, what's significant about it. and what to think about. The labels are so important to read if you're purchasing whiskey. First of all, there's a wall of whiskeys in front of you. And let's say you're buying a gift this holiday season. Please look at the proof and before you buy it, because you might be sending somebody down the wrong path.
It's so true. Let's go back to the history and also explain the difference between Irish whiskey and American whiskey and bourbon. So whiskey has been around for how long?
Well, I mean, you can look back 400 or 500 years. You have to trace kind of when distillation came. You could grow grapes in Europe and make wine. We've done that for 6,000, maybe even 8,000 years or longer.
Wow.
And you can make beer too, the equivalent of beer, or mead and things like that. But distillation was the act of removing or separating the alcohol and water through heat. And its origins come from Asia and then came to Europe. And you can, look at Scotch and Irish whiskey and something called the water of life, agavite. And where did that start? Well, people always ask, well, did it start in Ireland or Scotland? And I think the fun part is it depends on what country you're in when you ask them, because there aren't really good records. Scotch kind of traces back to there was a monk who was purchasing grains for whiskey, I think back in 1200 or something like that. So, but there's some general references back to the history, but it wasn't anything like it is today.
Wow.
But whiskey is, let's just define it and then we can talk the history. I mean, it's distilled grains. So you have to use grains. That has to be the start.
The water is so important when it comes to good whiskey.
Critical. Water sourcing, iron-free water, and it's critical for the color of the whiskey, and it plays a key role.
I'm getting thirsty.
Oh, yeah. I wish we had some right here.
I know.
We could do that next time. But when it comes off the still, it's clear, and it's really not whiskey yet. It might taste like the grains, which are essential, but it has to go in that barrel.
And how much of the flavor comes from that barrel?
Well,
or is it just coloring?
Yeah, it's color and flavor, and it's probably 80% that comes from the barrel, or even more. But you should be able to, when it's a bourbon, you should be able to taste the corn. When it's a Scotch, taste the barley, that type of thing.
Are all of the barrels charred?
Yes.
And they have to be.
Well, charring is essential. However, when we look at Irish whiskey versus bourbon, it does not require to be in new charred American oak barrels like bourbon is. So they will reuse the barrels. So the barrels play a key role, and the whiskey soaks into the barrel. Sure, it's oxidized too. That's color and flavor as well. But it's going to play a different role than it would from, say, a bourbon.
Okay. So is America kind of the founding father of whiskey, or we took it from Europe?
Yeah, absolutely not.
Okay.
We are not in any way. It does find its much older origins in Ireland and Scotland. But, we took that knowledge, came here, found rye, and started using rye for whiskey on the East Coast.
Got it.
Until around the post-Revolutionary War, and then the Whiskey Rebellion happened, and then people moved west and found corn as the primary grain. And in Canada, they use rye as well, and nowadays corn as well. So things have kind of evolved over time. Yeah.
So let's talk about the difference between whiskey and bourbon.
Right. Yes.
It's a very confusing one.
Well, and bourbon is a whiskey for sure. But Tennessee whiskey is not a bourbon, but it is a whiskey. Yeah. Tell me at any time if this doesn't make sense.
It kind of, to me, sounds like who's on first, second, third, that old-time thing.
We should address 1964,
okay,
which is relatively not that long ago.
It is not.
I come from that same I'm 63, but in 1964, it was signed into law that bourbon would be a distinct product of the U.S.
Okay.
And I think that year, that's special to us and our heritage.
Is that kind of like Scotch has to come from Scotland?
Correct.
Okay.
Which the defining Irish whiskey and Scotch whiskey, that happened in around the 1980s and 90s and actually was
That
updated.
is definitely not that long ago.
So you can make Scotch and Irish whiskey before that, but nowadays we have very, very defined rules and laws behind its production and the labeling, and that's what's so important.
Okay.
So like an Irish whiskey, not to distract from bourbon, we'll get back to bourbon.
Okay.
An Irish whiskey has to be, you have to use grains grown in Ireland. It has to be distilled and aged in Ireland, and it can't leave the island of Ireland in a wooden barrel.
It's got to leave in a bottle?
A bottle, or if you're going to bottle it somewhere else, it would have to leave in a container like a plastic container or something like that.
That seems like an interesting rule.
Right. But the whole thing is, if it's still in a wooden barrel, it's still aging.
So it has to do all of its aging in Ireland.
If you take those barrels and you take them over to another country and then, maybe you bottle it a year later, well, it's not an Irish whiskey anymore because now it's spent a year aging in a different country.
I think a lot of people think of Jameson immediately.
Yeah.
Is that kind of the first Irish whiskey, or are there others?
No, there were hundreds of others throughout history, and at times there were more or less. Sometimes they would go out of business or not, or just be really small production. Jameson
is
and
it just
the Middleton,
about marketing?
It's about taxes and how they ran their business and who was purchasing the whiskey barrels from them, and how that's where there was a consolidation. So now Jameson makes Redbreast and Middleton and a few other whiskeys. And so it was really consolidated from the original Dublin distillery. And the other big one would be Bushmills up north.
One of my mom's favorites. She doesn't drink much, but Bushmills is her go-to when she does drink.
Yeah, I love it. And also Tullamore Dew, of course.
Oh, I forgot.
Which is a kind of an older recipe that was revived to now be in the Cork distillery.
What are the major differences when it comes to tasting notes of an Irish whiskey versus a whiskey made here in the States?
I thought you'd never ask. Yeah. So there are so many differences.
Okay.
For one thing, the grains. Bourbon has to be by law 51% corn at least.
Okay.
So, what does cornbread taste like? It's kind of got that sweetness and you get those corn flavors from it. After the 51%, you can choose to use rye or wheat and maybe a little bit of barley, because barley is really an efficient grain at getting things going.
If you use rye, does that make it a rye whiskey or bourbon?
It does not.
Okay.
If it's 51% rye, then it's now a straight a rye whiskey. That's a different category, but it can't be called a bourbon.
How often is the grain mixture rye and corn, and is it several things, not just two? It's
brand identification, and so marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So, you might have a product like Maker's Mark, and they say, oh, we've got a high wheat content, winter wheat. Well, they still have to have that 51% corn and then wheat beyond that.
Got
so
it.
an Irish whiskey or a Scotch, not all, but some, will be the majority or all barley. And in the case of an Irish whiskey, they use some unmalted barley. There's a good historical story context there. And in Scotland, they use all malted barley. And the malting process is where you will soak the grains to get them to germinate, and then you have to dry them really quickly.
Wow.
Now, when they dry the grains in Scotland, they need a heat source. You talk about days before electricity. We needed a heat source.
Just because it's so damp and dreary there?
Yeah, and you got to do it relatively quickly.
Okay. And when we say relatively quickly, are we talking days?
Several days.
Okay.
Yeah. So they lay the grains out, the wet grains out on a floor, and underneath the heating source would be peat.
And that's why people say they don't or do like peated.
Because it's in the ground. It's vegetation in the ground that's been there for millions of years.
And it is something you can taste.
And conveniently, since there weren't trees in parts of Scotland, they would use that to heat their homes as well. So peat was they were pretty used to it. So it's just a heating source.
That is so fascinating. Okay, there's so much to know about whiskey and bourbon, and we're going to continue our conversation with Mike Ward in just 2 minutes. Well, if you know us at all, you know we love wine, but we also really love our whiskey. And there's so much to know about whiskey. We've mentioned Kentucky straight whiskey. We've talked about Irish whiskey, but there's Canadian whiskey. And I think the one that is surprising, Japanese whiskey. How long has Japan been in the game?
Well, it's a cool story. Are you ready for it?
Yeah.
First, two quick things. One is I have a friend who's a master of whiskey. There's only 8 of them in the world, and I'm working on getting him on. He lives in Chicago. He'll be on with us.
Please.
Probably not till after the holidays, but we're going to do that, and we'll get a lot more in-depth. So that's coming down the road. And when you think of Japan, you probably would normally think of
Sake.
Right. And so I'm also working on getting our local sake specialist. Ooh. And she's going to be on. I may not be till after the holidays. I'm trying to work on that as well so we can talk about sake. But enough of that. That's what's coming up.
Is Japanese whiskey new, or they've been doing this for ages and we're just now kind of catching on?
About 300 or 400 years.
Oh, okay.
And it's a great place to make and age whiskey, but where their influence came from was Scotland. Huh. So it was a Scotch producer that I used to know and I can't think of right now who came to Japan, helped them really build their whiskey industry. And then also, because they came from Scotland, they had that idea of peat. And it was a time in history where you didn't have electricity. So not that there's peat in Japan, and they would bring some in sometimes, but nowadays, it's a little bit different, but the whiskeys in Japan, because of that, tend to taste a little bit more closer to a Scotch whiskey. To me, they do than even an Irish whiskey does.
Really? I think it's so fascinating when I've been kind of doing research on this. A lot of Japanese whiskeys are winning the awards.
They're so great. And they used to be a little bit harder to get. But they're very regional. So think about like in Japan, you've got higher elevation, lower elevation. You got warmer areas, cooler areas. There's a lot of different places. It's a small country, but there's a lot of different environments to age the barrels. Uh-huh. And like when they make sake, which is a very, very difficult process that is done by people who have been doing it all their lives. Whiskey production in Japan is kind of like that too. I mean, they don't do anything half-hearted.
No,
they do,
all in.
They are all in, and doing it the correct way, and also making sure history is a big deal there too. So if you're a whiskey lover and you've never tried a Japanese whiskey, you should try one. There might be a few like high-proof Japanese whiskeys. I don't think that's kind of their thing.
It's more about flavor.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating. Okay, as I said, we could go on and on about whiskey, and we will throughout the next couple of months. But let's just break it down to some of the simplest things today, since this is our introduction to whiskey. And there are a lot of whiskey terms that I think people should know. Let's start with small batch. What exactly does that mean?
Well, think of in terms of, if you've got a distillery that has maybe 1 to 3 million barrels, one of the larger distilleries
Maker's Mark
in Kentucky, right? Or Beam or Heaven Hill or any of the big ones, right? So they have a lot of rick houses, they're also called. And they're, usually 6-8 stories tall.
Yeah, which if you're driving through and you don't know what you're looking at and you look over the countryside, it is really kind of mesmerizing to see.
Like what's in those huge barns they have there. Yeah.
Whiskey.
And the key is that they are not temperature controlled. So they're affected by the seasons.
Okay.
So when you think about small batch, you could take a barrel from the bottom floor, the middle, and the top.
Are they constantly moving those around, or if there is a barrel on the bottom, that's where it's going to be for the entire aging process?
That's typically how it is.
Okay.
So if you put it there, you come back in 4 to 6 years. Because remember, in Kentucky or Tennessee or here in Missouri, we don't need to age our whiskeys as long as they do in Scotland or Ireland because we have more defined seasons. Temperature's a little more consistent in Scotland and Ireland, so it might take 12, 18 or 21 years in
To
order
get
to age
almost
those
the same
whiskeys
effect.
to get their unique effect. Right. It just takes longer.
Okay. Is that whiskey that you grab from the bottom row going to taste different than the whiskey on the top row?
I would say, and this would be fun to do, we could go there and someone could do that and give us a sample from the barrel from the bottom, middle, and top, and you would tell the difference. If they said to you, these were barreled the same day and brought in here and put in these different areas, you could taste the difference.
So then is there any kind of demarcation that says it was on the bottom or the top? Is it called Lot B, or is it just it's all the same thing?
Sure, and sometimes there is, and that's an interesting marketing thing to pay attention to. Sure, but more likely you won't have to really concern yourself with that. You'll just know that a master distiller and and someone who is in charge of the warehouse picked the right barrels, put them together. Now the thing to consider is you look at the proof. Is it barrel strength? Or did they add some water to bring that strength down, which I prefer. I'm not a big high proof whiskey lover.
Same.
Some people love it.
Right.
I talk to people like that all the time. That's great. Just not my thing.
Yeah,
Maybe I'm a lightweight.
The first time I had that sip of Booker's, and it comes in a great kind of packaging with the wood and I was like, whew.
Yeah.
Okay, so small batch.
Small amount of barrels from a location. And it doesn't even have to be the same warehouse. It could be that they're picking barrels. Now, how many barrels is it? Well, it could be 4, it could be 6, could be 12, smaller than the amount that they normally use. So like a Jim Beam, might come from hundreds of barrels, the white label Jim Beam.
Are we going to pay more for a small batch whiskey than another one?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And it should be that way. The flavor should be a little bit more in-depth. But that doesn't mean they're all going to be $100. There's some great small batch whiskeys. I was just recently pouring Four Roses.
That's
They've
a good
got
one.
I was pouring a small batch whiskey right next to a single barrel whiskey. And so the people coming in were able to taste both and see and there were dramatic differences in those two whiskeys.
Okay, you just led to my next question. What is a single barrel or a single cask whiskey?
Remember that barrel's going to be in a certain location aging, and then it's going to be affected by oxidation and evaporation, and we all know what the name for the evaporated whiskey is. Angel's Share.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorry, I gave it to you. You had it.
Share?
Well, there was a Devil's Cut, which was something that they pulled out of the wood. But I don't even know if they still
do
make
that anymore.
Yeah, they might. So that single barrel is going to reflect one location of aging and one age statement if they have it on the bottle. Might have aged 6 years, 8 years, versus a small batch that will be from several different barrels.
Okay. Now we've got single malt. Help me with this one.
So really, I used to say that was really something that reflected Scotch whiskey, but now you can see single malts in Ireland, and you can even see single malts all over. There's even one that I tried from India that's really good.
Ooh, I didn't know they were in the game.
India makes more whiskey than any country in the world.
What?
But, yeah.
Can we get our hands on those here?
We are little by little, and they're really good. I've got a single malt whiskey from India. They're fantastic. They drink most of their whiskey there.
Okay.
They drink a lot of Scotch, but they make most whiskey, and that's pretty amazing, isn't it?
That is shocking to me. So
There's a lot of people there, too.
Yeah. Single malt means what exactly?
So by law in Scotland, it has to come from a single distillery.
Okay.
It's from a single grain malted barley. Okay.
Got it.
So then it has to, go by the other laws, which being produced in Scotland, aged in Scotland, bottled in Scotland. But typically those two single terms, single distillery, single malt, malted barley. So you wouldn't find any corn or wheat or rye.
Okay.
And malted barley has, do you drink Scotch?
I haven't had a lot of Scotch, but I think I would like it.
You drink Irish whiskey?
Yes.
So in and around the 1700s, mid-1700s, when England told the Irish producers, we're going to tax you on all your malted barley. Mm-hmm. They said, okay, well, we're going to use malted barley because we have to, but we're also going to use unmalted barley so it hasn't germinated. And that's what gives Irish whiskey sort of a leathery taste and smell. Also smooth. It's really smooth versus in Scotland where they typically only use malted barley.
Oh, as I said, there's so much to know, and I know we're getting to the end of our time, but real quickly, finishing barrels. If you see that on a label, what does it mean?
That is the coolest and newest thing that is just going to keep me teaching whiskey classes beyond whatever should be a normal retirement, because that is what whiskey producers are using and doing now that's revolutionized the industry. So, for example, you have your scotch and it's finished aging and it's qualified now for a scotch. So you go to Spain, travel to Spain, you go to sherry, you pick up some used sherry barrels where they've taken the sherry out and bottled it and hope to sell it. Nobody really drinks sherry anymore, but they hope to sell it. And you take those barrels back to Scotland and we put our 18-year scotch for a year or so in a used sherry barrel. And that's the finishing barrel.
That sherry?
100%. Yes.
It's just enough to kind of give it a different
like you can
flavor.
Still taste the scotch, of course, and everything that goes into it, but you get that little bit of, usually it's an Oloroso sherry, which that's another class. We'll do another sherry show. But you can pick up those notes. And now the newest thing is, what do you do with those white oak American barrels from right here in Missouri after they're toasted and the bourbon is finished? Bourbon's now ready to bottle and can't go in a different barrel by law, but you have all these great barrels that are reasonably expensive. We take those over to Ireland and Scotland, and then somebody puts their whiskey inside of that used barrel, bourbon barrel.
Wow. You touched on this briefly, but a lot of the barrels come from right here in the Show Me State.
We have the best barrels in the world, American oak barrels.
Why is that?
I like French oak barrels too for wine, but American oak barrels are perfect.
Is it just that we have more trees? Is it that we know what we're doing when we build these barrels? Why are we the source?
Well, all over the Midwest, but I like our barrels here in Missouri. But we have the right environment for those oak trees, and we have a lot of them.
Got it.
So years ago, I was able to do a 2-day seminar at Missouri Cooperage, industry-level seminar where they take you from you're out in the woods watching them cut down trees to where they process the wood and then make them into staves, and then we're back watching them put it into make barrels.
How long do the staves stay out on the lot just kind of before they're even made into a barrel?
Well, it depends on the master distiller or the winery, because when you when you drive down Highway 44 and you're passing Lebanon, Missouri, exit 128, you look over and you see a bunch of staves.
It looks kind of like pallets, but it's really the staves.
Not all of those are Missouri oak.
What?
There's some French oak there too,
Mixed
because
in?
they own a cooperage or a processing company in France. So there's some French oak out there too. Kendall Jackson comes here and uses the Missouri cooperage independent stave to make French oak barrels. So anyway, it's going to spend about a year.
Outdoors.
Or it could be longer. Sitting outdoors drying in the elements, it's perfect.
And that's what they want. They want it to be rained on, and they want it to be kind of hit by wind and dried out.
Sure. I mean, mostly you just want it, the interior of that wood to dry out so that you can make it into a barrel. And making barrels looks like the hardest job I've ever seen, but it is a craftsman, artisan job that few people can do and do it right.
There aren't nails in it, right?
No nails, no glue. Just the soaking the wood to get it to warp like that, and then putting the rings on it, even the top, no nails, no glue, and then they heat it up inside. It's a great tour, a little harder to take nowadays, but it's a great tour. So anyway, we have these great Missouri white oak barrels that we make here. And then remember, again, the amount of time that you let the fire last in the barrel is going to give a toast on it, usually 1 to 4 toast, you'd say, or char. And then that's going to make the whiskey a little darker, a little more intense. And so the Scotch producer that wants to use that for finishing barrels will take that into consideration.
Wow. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I have learned so much and my mouth is watering. We really didn't even get into suggestions on what to go get, but we'll talk about that in the upcoming weeks because it is a great gift for the holiday season, especially if you know somebody who loves whiskey, bourbon, or scotch, and we'll give you some suggestions.
And if I just had to say one last thing on it, if you're new to whiskey or you're buying it for yourself, you want to try it or a gift, just start with something that is 40% alcohol, 80 proof, or under 100, because you really have to work up to those high proof whiskeys.
Yeah. Well, this has been so much fun. I hope you guys had as much fun as we did and learned a little something as well. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Cheers to you, my friends.
Cheers.